What happens when love spirals into obsession and jealousy fuels betrayal? Today, we unravel a tragic tale of ambition, obsession, and a chilling murder that lay unsolved for decades. At its heart, it's not just a story of violence, but of justice delayed and the dark truths hidden beneath a facade of respectability. Today, we explore the haunting cold case of Sherry Rasmussen, a vibrant woman whose promising life was cruelly cut short. A quiet morning turns into tragedy. Monday, February 24th, 1986, was supposed to be just another ordinary day in Van Nuys, California. But for John Ruetten, a young engineer, it would become a day that would shatter his life forever. As he left his condo early that morning, he had no idea that his world was about to be turned upside down. Hours later, when John returned home, he was met with a scene that would haunt him for the rest of his life. His beautiful wife, Sherry Rasmussen, lay lifeless on the living room floor, her body brutally battered and shot multiple times. The horror of that moment is impossible to put into words. John's world had been shattered, his heart broken into a million pieces. Sherry, just 29 years old, had been ripped from his life in the most violent and senseless way imaginable. Sherry Rasmussen was the kind of person who left a lasting impression on everyone she met. With a bright smile and a heart full of compassion, she had a unique ability to make people feel seen and cared for. Sherry had always been a high achiever. Her intelligence and determination propelled her to become a skilled nurse, earning the respect and admiration of her colleagues. At just 29 years old, she had climbed the ranks to take on a director role at a prestigious medical center, a testament to her unwavering dedication to her profession. In November 1985, Sherry married John Ruetten, the love of her life. Their wedding marked the beginning of what should have been a beautiful journey together. John and Sherry shared big dreams of building a life filled with love, adventure, and family. Their love was the kind that made others believe in happy endings. But tragically, their story would take a devastating turn just months into their marriage. John Ruetten was a thoughtful and reserved man, known for his kind demeanor and easygoing nature. As an engineer, he was methodical and hardworking, but it was his gentle spirit and warmth that drew people to him. John valued the simple things in life: good friends, a steady career, and most importantly, love. Before meeting Sherry, John had been in a passionate but short-lived relationship with Stephanie Lazarus, a college acquaintance. While their time together was intense, it eventually fizzled out. For John, it was a chapter he closed as he moved forward with his life. When he met Sherry, everything seemed to fall into place. John was captivated by her intelligence, beauty, and zest for life. Together, they found a rare kind of love, one rooted in mutual respect, shared dreams, and a deep emotional connection. Investigation and trial. February 24th, 1986. Initial investigation. The Los Angeles Police Department, LAPD, responded to a 911 call from John Ruetten, reporting that his wife, Sherry Rasmussen, had been murdered in their Van Nuys condominium. The police arrived at the scene to find Sherry's lifeless body with multiple gunshot wounds and signs of a violent struggle. The broken glass from the patio door, the overturned furniture, and Sherry's stolen car suggested a burglary gone horribly wrong, or so it seemed at first glance. The LAPD investigated a group of local burglars suspected of targeting upscale homes in the area. Several individuals were questioned, and one man was briefly detained. One of the suspects, a man named Marcus Thompson, seemed promising at first. He had a history of burglary and had been known to target homes in the Van Nuys area. However, as detectives dug deeper, they found that Thompson had a solid alibi for the time of the murder. He had been at a friend's house watching a basketball game, and multiple witnesses confirmed his presence. He was eventually released from custody, and the investigation continued. The LAPD also investigated a suspicious person who had been seen around the Rasmussens' condominium complex on the day of the murder. The person, a woman named Sarah Lee, had been described as acting strangely and had been seen lingering around the area. However, when detectives tracked her down, she turned out to be a harmless neighbor who had been out for a walk. On February 24, 1986, 2 days after Sherry Rasmussen's murder, a Los Angeles Police Department LAPD patrol officer was driving through the Van Nuys neighborhood when he noticed a BMW parked on the side of the road. The car seemed out of place in the quiet residential area, and the officer's curiosity was piqued. As he approached the car, he noticed that it was locked, but there were no visible signs of damage or forced entry. The officer ran the license plate number through the police database and discovered that the car was registered to Sherry Rasmussen, the victim of the recent murder in Van Nuys. The officer immediately called for backup, and soon, a team of detectives and forensic experts arrived at the scene. They carefully processed the car for evidence, collecting fingerprints, hair samples, and other potential clues. The discovery of Sherry's car seemed to support the initial theory that she had been the victim of a burglary gone wrong. It appeared that the killer had stolen the car and then abandoned it in Van Nuys, possibly in an attempt to mislead the police or create a false trail. There were no signs of forced entry or struggle in the car, which seemed unusual given the violent nature of the crime. Additionally, the car was found in a relatively safe and quiet neighborhood, which didn't seem like a typical dumping ground for a stolen vehicle. These inconsistencies, combined with other evidence that would later come to light, would eventually lead detectives to re-examine their initial theory and pursue a new line of investigation. A father's suspicion. Sherry's family, however, was unconvinced with burglary theory earlier. Her father, Nels Rasmussen, had a gnawing feeling that something was being overlooked. Sherry, a skilled nurse and an advocate for others, was also physically strong and determined. Nels questioned how a random burglar could have overpowered her in such a brutal manner. "I told the detectives from the beginning, this wasn't a burglary," Nels would later recount in interviews. The family was further troubled by the bite mark on Sherry's arm, an unusual and intimate act of violence. To them, it indicated something far more personal than a burglary. Nels began to suspect that the key to solving the case lay closer to home. From the outset, Nels Rasmussen had a suspect in mind: Stephanie Lazarus, a police officer with the LAPD and John Ruetten's former girlfriend. In the weeks leading up to Sherry's death, Stephanie had shown unsettling behavior. She had visited Sherry at work uninvited, warning her to stay away from John. Nels was adamant that detectives should investigate Stephanie, but his concerns were dismissed. As detectives spoke with several witnesses who reported a disturbing confrontation between Sherry and a woman named Stephanie Lazarus. According to the witnesses, the two women had gotten into a heated argument at a party several months prior, with Stephanie becoming aggressive and possessive towards John, Sherry's husband. It seemed as though the police were more interested in securing their own officer's reputation rather than pursuing a thorough and impartial investigation. By focusing on John Ruetten as the prime suspect, they were able to divert attention away from Stephanie's suspicious behavior and potential involvement in the crime. Detectives learned that Stephanie had been deeply in love with John, but he had ended their relationship and moved on to Sherry. The rejection had reportedly sent Stephanie into a tailspin, and she had become fixated on John and increasingly jealous of his relationship with Sherry. However, as detectives dug deeper, they started to suspect that John might have been more involved in Sherry's murder than they initially thought. Detectives began to suspect that John Ruetten, Sherry's husband, may have been secretly wanting to reconnect with his ex-girlfriend Stephanie Lazarus. It was discovered that John and Stephanie had a long and complicated history. They had been in a passionate and all-consuming relationship before John met Sherry. Although John had ended things with Stephanie to be with Sherry, it seemed that he may have still had feelings for his ex. As the investigation continued, detectives found some inconsistencies in John's alibi for the time of the murder. They also discovered that John had been struggling financially and that he stood to gain a significant amount of money from Sherry's life insurance policy. The police brought John in for questioning again, and this time they pressed him for more information about his relationship with Stephanie and his activities on the day of the murder. John denied any involvement in Sherry's death, but detectives noticed that he seemed nervous and agitated during the interview. As the evidence mounted, detectives began to suspect that John Ruetten might have been the one who killed his wife, Sherry. They wondered if he had used his relationship with Stephanie to manipulate her into helping him commit the crime, or if he had acted alone. But what did this mean for the investigation? Had John's desire to reconnect with Stephanie motivated him to kill his wife? Or was Stephanie somehow involved in Sherry's murder, perhaps as a way to eliminate the competition and win John back? The investigation was ongoing, but one thing was certain. John Ruetten was now the prime suspect in the murder of his wife, Sherry Rasmussen. As the investigation continued, detectives began to feel frustrated and defeated. They had pursued every lead, every tip, and every suspect, but nothing seemed to pan out. It was as if the killer had vanished into thin air, leaving behind no evidence, no clues, and no trail to follow. For the Rasmussen family, this misdirection was agonizing. Sherry's mother, Loretta, spent sleepless nights replaying the events in her mind, questioning how such a bright and promising life could end so tragically. "She was our everything," Loretta said, her voice breaking, and to see her case treated like just another file on someone's desk, it was unbearable. The bite mark on Sherry's arm, a critical piece of evidence, was swabbed for DNA. But in 1986, forensic science was still in its infancy. Without the advanced technology available today, detectives couldn't make use of the sample. The case hit a dead end. The case goes cold by the end of 1986. Sherry's murder investigation had stalled. Leads were exhausted, and the burglary theory remained the official explanation. Stephanie Lazarus, the person Sherry's family had pointed to from the beginning, continued her career with the LAPD, even rising through the ranks. For the Rasmussen family, the lack of progress was a bitter pill to swallow. They felt ignored and abandoned by the very system meant to seek justice for their daughter. They held vigils, contacted private investigators, and wrote letters to the LAPD urging them to reopen the case. Her father said, "I didn't care how long it took. I wasn't going to stop until we got answers." The breakthrough came in 2009, when advances in DNA technology allowed detectives to re-examine the evidence collected from the crime scene. The DNA analysis focused on the bite mark left on Sherry's arm, a crucial piece of evidence that had been overlooked for decades. As the results came in, detectives were stunned to discover that the DNA matched Stephanie Lazarus, the same police officer who had been suspected by Sherry's father, Nels Rasmussen, all along. "The police told me, she's a cop. She's not capable of this," Nels said. "But I knew in my heart that something wasn't right." The revelation sent shockwaves through the LAPD, with many of Stephanie's colleagues struggling to reconcile the evidence with the officer they thought they knew. Stephanie had risen through the ranks, earning a reputation as a respected and skilled detective. But as investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a disturbing trail of evidence linking Stephanie to the crime. Witnesses came forward to recall Stephanie's confrontations with Sherry, including a heated argument at a party where Stephanie had become aggressive and possessive towards John. Others remembered Stephanie's obsessive behavior, including her repeated phone calls and visits to John's workplace. Further investigation revealed that Stephanie had purchased a .38 caliber revolver around the time of the murder, a gun that matched the caliber of the bullet used to kill Sherry. The discovery raised further suspicions, and detectives began to piece together a timeline of Stephanie's actions leading up to the murder. As it turned out, Stephanie had manipulated the investigation from the very beginning. As a police officer, she had access to sensitive information and was able to use her position to influence the direction of the investigation. She had even been part of the initial investigation, using her knowledge of police procedures to avoid suspicion. But despite her best efforts, Stephanie couldn't escape the evidence. On June 5th, 2009, she was arrested at LAPD headquarters, the very place where she had worked for years. As she was led away in handcuffs, her colleagues looked on in stunned silence, struggling to comprehend the revelation. As the case against Stephanie Lazarus began to build, detectives couldn't help but wonder how they had missed her involvement for so long. The answer, it seemed, lay in Stephanie's cunning and manipulation. She had used her position and knowledge to evade suspicion, but in the end, justice had caught up with her. The trial. Justice finally served in 2012. Stephanie Lazarus stood trial for the first-degree murder of Sherry Rasmussen, a case that would expose the darker side of obsession and jealousy. The prosecution, led by Deputy District Attorney Shannon Presby, painted a chilling picture of a woman consumed by her own desires and unable to accept rejection. The DNA evidence from the bite mark on Sherry's arm was pivotal, providing undeniable proof of Stephanie's involvement in the crime. The prosecution explained how the DNA sample had been collected, preserved, and matched to Stephanie, leaving no doubt about her guilt. Stephanie's defense, on the other hand, attempted to cast doubt on the DNA evidence, suggesting contamination and mishandling. However, the jury saw through these arguments, recognizing them as a desperate attempt to deflect responsibility. The verdict. On March 8, 2012, the jury delivered their verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. The courtroom erupted into a mixture of emotions, with Sherry's family and friends feeling a sense of relief and vindication, while Stephanie's supporters looked on in shock and disbelief. Stephanie was sentenced to 27 years to life in prison, bringing a measure of closure to Sherry's family. For Nels Rasmussen, Sherry's father, the verdict was a bittersweet vindication of his decades-long fight for justice. He had never given up hope that his daughter's killer would be brought to justice. And finally, after 26 long years, he had his answer. As Stephanie was led away in handcuffs, Sherry's family and friends felt a sense of justice, knowing that the woman responsible for her brutal murder would spend the rest of her life behind bars. The case served as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of obsession and jealousy, and the importance of holding perpetrators accountable for their crimes. The aftermath. The Sherry Rasmussen case exposed troubling flaws in the justice system, particularly the dangers of bias when investigating one of their own. It also highlighted the perseverance of a family determined to uncover the truth. What do you think about this case? And how should law enforcement handle cases involving their own officers? Let us know in the comments below. Imagine being accused of a heinous crime you didn't commit, spending years behind bars, only to later find out the real culprit had been walking free all along. This is the chilling tale of justice delayed, a story of two innocent young girls, a grieving family, and a wrongly accused man. How did a peaceful suburban park turn into the scene of a nightmare? And why did it take so long to uncover the truth? Today's story takes us back to Zion, Illinois in 2005 to unravel a harrowing case that shook a small town to its core. It was a warm spring day on May 8th, 2005. The sun shone brightly, and the small town of Zion, Illinois was alive with children playing in parks and riding bikes through quiet streets. Among them were two inseparable best friends, 8-year-old Laura Hobbs and 9-year-old Crystal Tobias. The girls, full of life and laughter, set off on their bikes to Beulah Park, just a short ride from their homes. Hours passed, and the girls didn't return home. Their parents grew increasingly anxious as the minutes dragged on. Initially, they thought the girls might have lost track of time, but when the sun dipped below the horizon and darkness fell, worry turned into full-blown panic. A frantic search began. Family members, neighbors, and local police worked tirelessly, combing through the park, wooded areas, and nearby neighborhoods. Flashlights flickered against tree trunks, voices called out into the night, and every shadow was investigated. But as the night deepened, their worst fears began to solidify. Something terrible had happened. In the early morning hours of May 9th, Laura's father, Jerry Hobbs, and her grandfather, driven by a mix of desperation and hope, ventured into Beulah Park once more. Armed with flashlights that pierced through the dark and their unwavering determination, they scoured the area for any trace of the girls. The stillness of the night was shattered when they stumbled upon a harrowing scene that would haunt them forever. Amidst the dense trees and underbrush, they found the lifeless bodies of Laura and Crystal. The brutality of the crime was evident. Laura had been stabbed 20 times, and Crystal 11, their small frames bearing the marks of an unthinkable rage. The heartbreaking discovery not only shattered their families, but plunged the entire community into mourning, their once tranquil park forever marked by the darkness of that night. The town was rocked to its core. Two young lives full of promise had been snuffed out in the most horrifying way imaginable. The peaceful suburban community turned into a hub of fear and suspicion overnight. Everyone wanted to know, who could have done this? The first investigation, the police worked tirelessly, scouring the park and interviewing witnesses, but their investigation soon zeroed in on a familiar figure, Jerry Hobbs, Laura's own father. Jerry's troubled past included a history of domestic altercations and a criminal record, making him an easy target in the eyes of law enforcement. Jerry's past painted a picture of a man with deep-seated anger issues. He had been arrested multiple times, with charges ranging from assault to resisting arrest. At one point, a domestic dispute led to a physical altercation with Laura's mother, which further strained their already tumultuous relationship. In another incident, Jerry had been involved in a bar fight that ended with him being charged with aggravated assault. His criminal record, though unrelated to the heinous crime at hand, made him appear guilty in the eyes of the police and the public. To the investigators, Jerry fit the profile of someone who could snap under pressure, despite the lack of concrete evidence linking him to the murders. Facing hours of grueling, high-pressure interrogation, Jerry eventually broke down and confessed to the murders. For investigators, this confession seemed like the final piece of the puzzle, wrapping the case up neatly. But behind the scenes, cracks in the narrative were already forming. Jerry's confession, extracted after over 20 hours of relentless questioning, lacked specific details that aligned with the crime scene. Furthermore, neighbors and family members voiced concerns, insisting Jerry loved his daughter and had been coerced into admitting guilt. Despite these red flags, the justice system charged forward. Jerry Hobbs was swiftly arrested and publicly labeled as the killer. While the authorities felt the case was closed, a nagging question persisted in the minds of those closest to him. Could Jerry really have done this? Jerry's confession immediately raised eyebrows and ignited debates. Friends, family, and even acquaintances who knew him were quick to rally behind his innocence, vehemently arguing that he had been coerced into confessing after an excruciating 20-hour-long interrogation. Jerry's demeanor during his confession further fueled suspicions. He appeared confused, broken, and overwhelmed rather than guilty or calculating. Despite these glaring issues, the justice system turned a deaf ear. Jerry was promptly arrested, charged with the heart-wrenching murders of his own daughter and her best friend, and thrown into a prison cell. For 5 agonizing years, he languished behind bars, burdened with the label of a monster, while his family's pleas for justice fell on deaf ears. But something didn't add up. In 2008, a breakthrough came. DNA evidence found on Laura's body was tested, and the results were shocking. The DNA did not match Jerry Hobbs. Suddenly, the case that seemed airtight was thrown into chaos. If Jerry wasn't the killer, then who was? Could the real culprit still be out there? This revelation sparked a renewed investigation. The focus shifted from Jerry to other potential suspects. Years had passed, and the trail had grown cold, but detectives refused to give up. The question now loomed: who is the killer? After all this, who is the killer in your opinion? Comment below. Before we reveal the answer, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more gripping stories like this. Your support helps us bring these tales of justice to light. In 2009, hundreds of miles away in Arlington, Virginia, a chilling turn of events brought police attention to a man named Jorge Torres. Torres, a former U.S. Marine with a seemingly disciplined exterior, had been harboring a dark and violent nature. His name came up during investigations into a series of brutal crimes, including the murder of a Navy sailor, Amanda Snell. Torres had skillfully masked his predatory tendencies, allowing him to evade suspicion for years, but his trail of violence finally led to his capture. When authorities arrested him and connected him to Amanda's murder, it marked the beginning of the unmasking of a deeply sinister individual whose crimes went far beyond what anyone could have imagined. When authorities ran Jorge Torres' DNA through a national database, the results sent shockwaves through the investigative team. The DNA matched the evidence found on Laura Hobbs' body, confirming their worst fears. This revelation uncovered a dark truth. Jorge Torres, who was merely 16 years old at the time of the Zion murders, had committed the horrific killings of Laura and Crystal. What made this even more chilling was that Torres didn't stop there. his life spiraled further into violence as he went on to commit additional heinous crimes, leaving a trail of devastation in his wake. Background of the involved: Jorge Torres, outwardly a disciplined former U.S. Marine, had a hidden past steeped in violence and disturbing behavior. Even as a teenager, his violent tendencies hinted at a dark path that went unnoticed by those around him. At the time of the Zion murders, Torres lived near Beulah Park and had interacted with Laura and Crystal on several occasions, making his eventual connection to the case both shocking and heartbreaking. On the other hand, Laura's father, Jerry Hobbs, carried the weight of a troubled past. Known for a history of domestic disputes, he became an easy target for investigators. Despite a glaring lack of concrete evidence, his prior record painted him as a convenient suspect. The tragic irony is that while Jerry grieved for his daughter, he was simultaneously vilified and wrongfully accused, a misstep that delayed justice for years. Justice, finally. In 2015, Jorge Torres was convicted and sentenced to death for his crimes. Meanwhile, Jerry Hobbs was exonerated and released from prison after spending 5 years locked away for a crime he didn't commit. Jerry's release, however, was bittersweet. Though he was free, the years lost in confinement and the stigma of being branded a killer left deep emotional scars. Hobbs sued law enforcement for his wrongful conviction and eventually received a settlement, though no amount of money could truly compensate for what he endured. As for Torres, his death sentence marked a rare moment of justice for the families of Laura and Crystal. The court proceedings revealed chilling details about his violent tendencies and lack of remorse. For Laura and Crystal's families, the verdict brought a sense of closure, but the pain of their loss could never fully be healed. This case raises so many questions about our justice system. Could Jerry's wrongful imprisonment have been avoided? How did the real killer evade capture for so long? And what can be done to prevent such tragedies in the future? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. What would you do if a cold case in your quiet little town suddenly erupted with shocking truths years after everyone thought justice had been served? For one grieving family, answers came far too late, and the revelations were nothing short of horrifying. We dive into a case that proves the old saying, "Justice delayed is justice denied." But in this case, justice, when it finally came, brought answers nobody could have imagined. It was 2008 in the quiet, picturesque town of Millstone, where time seemed to flow gently, unhurried by the chaos of the outside world. Nestled amidst rolling hills and lush greenery, this was a town where everyone knew each other by name. The local coffee shop buzzed with friendly chatter, children played tag in the parks, and neighbors stopped by unannounced to share homemade pies. But on a crisp October morning, the serenity of Millstone was shattered. 20-year-old Emily Carter, a promising college student known for her bright smile and caring nature, had disappeared. Emily was the kind of person everyone admired, the daughter of a local school teacher and a retired firefighter. She had grown up in Millstone and was cherished by all who knew her. Emily's life revolved around her studies, her close-knit family, and her small group of friends. She was known for her volunteer work at the town's animal shelter and her passion for photography, often seen with her camera slung over her shoulder as she captured the beauty of Millstone. On the night of her disappearance, Emily had been at the university library preparing for midterms. She sent a quick text to her roommate around 10:15 p.m., saying she'd be home soon, but Emily never made it home. When Emily's roommate woke up the next morning and realized she hadn't returned, she called Emily's parents. Alarm bells went off immediately. Emily was reliable to a fault. She wouldn't just vanish without a word. Her family reported her missing to the Millstone Police Department within hours. The police, initially treating it as a routine missing persons case, began by retracing her last known steps. Several students at the library confirmed seeing Emily that night. One remembered her leaving around 10:30 p.m. Security cameras outside the library captured Emily walking toward the main road, her backpack slung over one shoulder. After that, the trail went cold. Emily's phone pinged near Millstone's outskirts around 11 p.m., but then went silent, leaving no trace of her whereabouts. As news of Emily's disappearance spread, the entire town mobilized. Hundreds of volunteers joined search parties, scouring forests, fields, and abandoned buildings. Flyers with Emily's smiling face were plastered on every lamppost and storefront. Her parents, Sarah and David Carter, appeared on local news stations, pleading for anyone with information to come forward. Sarah, her voice trembling, begged, "If you've seen Emily or know anything, no matter how small, please help us bring our daughter home." The Millstone Police Department quickly expanded their search. Despite their limited resources, they brought in state authorities to assist. Investigators delved into Emily's life, looking for any clues that might explain her sudden disappearance. Emily's friends were interviewed extensively. They all described her as happy and focused, with no signs of trouble in her personal life. The Carters were a loving family with no history of conflict. There was no evidence to suggest Emily had run away. Emily had recently broken up with her boyfriend, Jake Henderson, a fellow college student. Though the breakup had been amicable, police questioned Jake thoroughly. He provided a solid alibi, confirmed by his roommates. With no clear leads, investigators began looking into anyone who might have had a motive to harm Emily. Despite Jake's alibi, police initially viewed him with suspicion. He was cooperative but visibly shaken by the accusations. Investigators eventually ruled him out after verifying his whereabouts. A rumor circulated that Emily had argued with a librarian over a late book fee the week before her disappearance. This turned out to be baseless gossip, but it consumed valuable time as police looked into the claim. A few witnesses reported seeing an unfamiliar man near the library on the night Emily vanished. Sketches were drawn, and the man was identified as a traveling salesman passing through town. He too was cleared of involvement. Weeks turned into months, and despite exhaustive efforts, the case remained unsolved. Police followed every lead, from anonymous tips to psychics offering visions of Emily's whereabouts, but none panned out. The town of Millstone grew restless. Many criticized the police for their inability to solve the case, while others speculated wildly about what might have happened. Some believed Emily had been abducted by someone passing through town. Others theorized she might have been targeted by someone she knew, perhaps a secret admirer or someone with an unspoken grudge. A few whispered darker rumors about cults or organized crime, though these were dismissed as baseless fears. Emily's parents were devastated. Sarah Carter admitted in an emotional interview, "Every time the phone rings, I hope it's Emily. Every time there's a knock at the door, I pray she's come home." But as the days go by, it gets harder to hold on to hope. Where do you think Emily go? Leave your comments and thoughts below. Fast forward to 2015, 7 years after Emily's disappearance. A construction crew digging up an old drainage pipe in a wooded area just outside of town uncovered a shallow grave. Inside were human remains, and it didn't take long for the DNA test to confirm they belonged to Emily Carter. The news reignited the community's anguish. Who had done this? Why was Emily buried here? Investigators were under immense pressure to find answers. Emily's family, heartbroken but hopeful for closure, pleaded for anyone with information to come forward. But here's where things get even more chilling. The autopsy revealed Emily had been strangled. This wasn't just a case of someone hiding a body, it was premeditated murder. As the investigation reopened, a crucial lead came in from an unexpected source. A former high school janitor who had worked at Emily's school was arrested for an unrelated assault in a nearby town. When police searched his belongings, they found something that sent shivers down their spines. A notebook with entries that described Emily in unnervingly intimate detail. One entry stood out. She knows too much. It has to end. This man, Stephen Hayes, was a reclusive figure in Millstone. Few people remembered him, but those who did described him as quiet, odd, and prone to angry outbursts. He had worked at Emily's school during her teenage years and left under mysterious circumstances after a confrontation with a teacher. The discovery of the notebook was the turning point the case desperately needed. When Stephen Hayes, a former janitor at Emily's high school, was arrested for an unrelated assault, no one suspected he might hold the key to solving Emily's murder. But during a routine search of his belongings, detectives stumbled upon a chilling piece of evidence, a notebook filled with obsessive and sinister entries about Emily. The police were horrified as they read through the pages. Hayes had documented details of Emily's life that only someone watching her closely could know. Her routines, her favorite hangouts, even personal secrets she had never shared publicly. The most disturbing entry of all was short but devastating. She knows too much. It has to end. Detectives began piecing together a timeline. Hayes' obsession with Emily likely began when she was still in high school. He followed her movements, recording every detail in his notebook. After her disappearance, Hayes vanished from Millstone, taking his dark secrets with him. Confronted with the notebook, Hayes denied any involvement in Emily's murder. But inconsistencies in his alibi began to surface. Surveillance footage from the night of Emily's disappearance revealed a car matching the description of Hayes' vehicle near the park, where she was last seen. Moreover, forensic testing uncovered traces of Emily's DNA on items recovered from Hayes' garage. What really sealed the case, however, was a witness who came forward. A retired teacher from Emily's school. She recalled seeing Hayes arguing with Emily outside the school just weeks before her disappearance. The argument, though brief, had unsettled her. As the evidence mounted, Hayes' calm facade began to crack. Under pressure during an intense interrogation, he finally confessed. He admitted to luring Emily to a secluded spot on the pretense of wanting to apologize for past behavior. When she rejected him and threatened to report his harassment, he snapped. his confession revealed a cold, calculated plan to silence her forever. In 2018, Stephen Hayes was convicted of Emily Carter's murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. The trial was an emotional roller coaster for Emily's family and the Millstone community. Many felt relief that the killer had finally been caught, but others couldn't shake the feeling that this justice had come far too late. Emily's parents have since become advocates for missing persons cases, urging families never to give up hope. They believe that no case should ever go cold and that every missing person deserves to be found. What are your thoughts on this case? Should communities be doing more to protect young women from predators like Hayes? And how can law enforcement ensure that cases like Emily's don't go unsolved for so long? Let us know in the comments below. We want to hear your opinions. And if you're captivated by stories like these, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We share compelling tales of crime and justice every week, and you won't want to miss a single one.